I really appreciate that. So no chit-chatting, no phone calls, and let's leave our questions kind of to the end. This is a very important topic about end-of-life issues. And, you know, it's inevitable. We're all going to get there someday, some sooner, some later. We just don't know. So this is something that everybody needs to think about. After I had my child, I have a durable power of attorney and a living will because I needed to pick who would raise my child. And I needed to pick, and I didn't pick anybody in my family. That's interesting. It was funny because the attorney says, you need to write a letter. Why you pick this person that's not in your family? But that's a whole different subject. But it's very important to me that I knew what my wishes were going to be at the end of life. So I sat down with my husband and we filled out these very important papers. When my son turned 18, he filled out his papers because I was no longer responsible for him. And I could tell you till the cows come home, my son doesn't want to live like this, and no one would ever believe me because it's not on paper. So we had that talk as well. And so it's like insurance. You hope you never need it, but it's there when you do. Okay. So today we're lucky to have Dr. William Stringer from Harvard UCLA, but he's really not. He's from Providence Little Company of Mary because he's our medical director of pulmonary rehab, and we are really blessed to have him. Joseph and I really feel that when Dr. Chang left, we love Dr. Chang and we respect him, but we won the lotto when we got Dr. Stringer. So we are very honored to have Dr. Stringer here. Harvard UCLA Medical Center, Professor of Medicine at the Gaffin School of Medicine at UCLA. And he's the Division Chief of Pulmonary and Critical Care Physiology and Medicine at Harvard UCLA. He's a really important guy, and he's ours. So I'd like to introduce Dr. William Stringer.
Okay, so what Jackie didn't tell you is, I said, well, what do you want to talk about? He said, you know, COPD, interstitial lung disease, asthma. No, none of that. We want somebody to talk about death. Well, that's not my usual topic, but it's actually important to me. I work in the ICU, and I see people come in the ICU all the time. They no longer can make decisions for themselves. They're intubated, they're sedated, whatever. And nobody in the family has any idea what they would want. So I'm going to give you some homework at the end. The first homework at this point is talk to somebody in your family about what you would want. We're going to talk a little bit about durable power of attorney versus living will. But think of it this way. If you're dead, that's off the map. You're dead. If you're alive and you can make decisions, that's great. It's that middle ground where you need a living will. You're alive, but you can't tell people what you want. And so you need to designate somebody in your family and talk to them. And it's not an easy thing to do. Most people don't talk about death. Death is not a topic we like to hear about in our culture. And we've all had religions that we've been raised with, cultures about what happens after death. I'm not going to attack any of that. That's much too complicated for me. I'm going to talk a little bit about medicine and the way that we approach death, and also the way the humanities approach death. And I'll give you some more homework later, but the most important thing is go home and talk to somebody in your family about what you would want if you were on that ventilator and couldn't tell them for yourself what you wanted. Okay, so I am going to keep going here. This is what we're going to talk about. Okay, so can we turn the lights down just a tish? Does anybody know what this is?
A screen.
It's not a blank screen. I need the lights down.
It's death. It's death.
No, it's not death. All right, Jackie's working on it. Okay, can you see it now? It's from here to here. There's like a little strip there, and there's a little dot. Okay, that's Earth. From 3.7 billion miles away. Voyager, which we launched in 1977, is now almost 4 billion miles away from Earth. So that's looking back at Earth. That's the Milky Way, all of those planets. So I know we think everything's super important, but we're a really small part of the whole galaxy. So I just wanted you to realize that that was the last picture that Voyager took. They turned off the camera so that they would actually conserve energy so it could continue to go on. It's the first thing that's left our solar system. Okay, so who has read Gilgamesh? Okay, can you hear? Louder, okay. If you can't hear me, just wave your hand if my mouth's moving and you can't hear me. So Gilgamesh is the oldest story that we know. It's about 2,000 years before the Bible was written. So 2,000 years. It's the oldest story that we have. It was actually written in cuneiform, which is sort of a wedge-shaped language. It took a long time to decipher. It turns out that it's Akkadian, which is right before Sumerian, which is a very ancient language. And what's the oldest story about? Death and immortality. So it was his search for immortality. He didn't want to die. And Enkidu was sort of his alter ego. He was an animal, sort of made human. You can't really see that. For some reason that's not focusing. Hang on a second, I gotta focus this. That better? That's better. Okay. All right, so, well, that's a good question, huh? Okay, so I'm a lung doctor, so I think about inhalation and exhalation all the time, or inspiration or expiration. Expiration is another word for death, right? So one of the ways to define death is to emit your last breath. So I particularly like that one, but to extinguish as in a fire, to breathe out, to come to the end, terminate as in a contract, guarantee, or offer, or to breathe out from your lungs. So I think about expiration all the time. I suppose that's true of the milk in your fridge too. So, as I mentioned, I'm not going to attack this from the religious or the cultural point of view because that's way too complicated. But how do we stay happy and healthy, and how do we have some control over what happens to us when we die? Okay, so does anybody know what 21 grams is? 21 grams? Okay, so what this doctor did about 1900 is he weighed people before and after they died. Okay? And there was 21 grams difference. So he decided that was the weight of the soul. So if you see the reference to 21 grams, it's not cocaine, it's the soul, okay? Anyway, so it was a terrible experiment, but anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that. Okay, so I want you, this is the second, so the first homework was go talk to somebody in your family about what you want. The second one is to consider going to see this. If you get Amazon or Netflix or those kind of things, this is really a good video. I'm going to play you the first 3 minutes of it. It's almost an hour long. We don't have that much time. But I want you to just listen to what they say in the first 3 minutes. And I'll make sure it's turned up, or maybe I'll use the microphone or something here. So hang on a second. Okay, so if you guys can't hear this back there, let me know.
To have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feelings, an excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression. And with all this, yet to die. Humankind has always been restless. Never satisfied with our physical limitations, we have always strived for more. With machines we conquer gravity and travel faster and farther than any other animal. We explore the heavens, the last great frontier.
landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
And we manipulate our own biology through medical science. In defiance of nature, we have manufactured a means to become rulers of the natural world. What is left to conquer? And are we satisfied? Since time immemorial, we have battled our greatest limitation. One which seems to render our efforts to overcome and conquer insignificant.
I'm going to stop there, and I know that's just a little bit of a tidbit, but you should go home and watch the whole thing. It really talks about how death is approached in different cultures, and every culture has a creation myth and a death myth. They talk about religion, but they talk about why, when you begin to talk about death, that there is so much animosity and hate and violence towards each other. And I know that sounds strange, but it's really worth watching because I think it'll help you understand why the world is so crazy right now. And I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm religion A, whatever that is. Pick a religion. You're religion B, whatever that is. And I tell you that if you want to go to heaven, you need to be religion A. But you're religion B. So what do I do with you? Either I convert you to A or I exterminate you, one or the other. Because you're negating my religion by saying that my religion doesn't work, whatever it is. So I want you to listen to that. It's a sociologic approach to death and understanding how it affects us during life. But in truth, death actually gives us meaning. It puts time limits on the amount of time that we're here on the earth. And so flight from death, quest for immortality. Okay, so I told you I'd try to get to the other humanities. So one of the first sort of crossovers between death and science or medicine was really dissection. So the Catholic Church didn't allow dissection of the human body. So they would actually steal corpses. This was actually a time-honored profession, as going to the graveyard after somebody had been buried, digging them up and selling them so that they could be dissected. And this is Vesalius. This is about 1500. And he drew them in all sorts of really interesting positions. So the anthropomorphic effects of this are just unbelievably great, especially so you can see the skull pondering another skull there. So a little bit of humor. Okay, so this looks like, you know, some painting you'd see in a bank or something. There's a bunch of ships, there's a bunch of people, it's the shoreline. Maybe it's the whale observatory you're going to. But if you look at it closely, I don't see any humpbacks out there yet. There's an old man, there's a younger man, there's mom and two kids, right? Okay, so what's in the harbor? Mom and two kids. One ship's going in, that's the businessman. One ship's going out. Okay, so it's about death. It's about what time we have on Earth, and that's a limited amount of time. It's not forever. So talking about death isn't fun, but on the other hand, it's what gives meaning to our lives. So I really like Goya, and he used to paint all these beautiful pictures of people, beautiful colors, young people in the prime of their life, right? Okay, so that's what he was painting for the king. This is what he was painting at home. He was massively depressed. So that's Saturn eating its child. This is the La Cabra, which is the devil. And this is two brothers beating each other to death. So Goya had a real dark side. But he thought about death a lot, actually. So I don't know if you read Spanish or not, but he's just saying, you know, at 98 years old, he can hardly do it anymore. And so he's all bent over, two canes. You know, we've all been there when we don't feel good. And he was realizing that at some point, no matter how good or how great your life is, you're going to end. Now, you've all been to the doctor and left and not been all that happy. I know you have. I try to avoid that as much as possible, but this is what Goya thought about doctors. So there's a doctor here, and I'll use the word mule because that's the nice thing to say. The patient is expired, and he's still trying to figure out what happened to him. Okay, so he didn't think much of doctors. He was actually he was deaf. He went to a lot of doctors. Nobody could fix him. But this is the other way to look at it. This is a painting that's in London. So the doctor has come to the house as a house visit. The child has either fallen asleep or died. The little toy that the kid was holding has fallen on the ground. Mother is destitute. Father is sort of looking on, and sunrise is coming. So they spent all night with this kid, and finally expired. And again, the doctor's thinking, well, what could we have done differently? How could we make this better? Okay, so this is Goya himself. He lived to about 85 years old, which was pretty old back then. But that's him, ill. That's his doctor. That's Dr. Arriata behind him. Dr. Arriata is giving him some kind of medication, probably not anything that he should be giving him. And look at his hand. He's holding on to life. He's just barely there, almost dead. And so what he wrote, Goya painted this after, it's in the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Anybody from Minneapolis? Have you seen it? It's beautiful. But this is what he wrote. Goya, in gratitude to his friend Arriata for the compassionate care which he saved his life during the acute and dangerous illness he suffered at the end of 1819. So he was basically admitting that this person had saved his life. Okay, so this is another one. These are two older ladies here. They look almost cadaverish, and that's death behind them there, looking on. So that's the way art sort of thinks about it. Okay, so what's medicine doing about that? Well, I can't tell you how many regenerative medicine things are going on right now. We can't wait to make your cells do what they're not doing right now. But we haven't figured it out yet. So it doesn't work for lungs yet, I'll tell you that. I keep hoping it will. But what this is, these are older people. They're coming in little little wagons and little wheelchairs, and people are dragging them there. Super old. They jump in the fountain of youth. They get younger, younger, younger. They come out. They're frolicking. They're eating. They're doing things behind tents, etc. Okay, so if you look closely at this, and this has a lot to do with our current president, these are all girls, okay? So the only thing a guy needs is a young girl, okay? But the girls need to be regenerated. So it's very sexist. I'll just apologize for it. But anyway, so that was the thinking back in 1500 anyway. But medicine is definitely after the fountain of youth. And that's your stem cells. And when we get to the point that we can actually control stem cells, that will be a huge new wave. Unfortunately, it's not here yet, but we're after it pretty hard. This is the Black Death. This is the Black Death flying over Europe. You remember a third of the population probably died in Europe during the multiple black plagues, which is bubonic plague. And you think about what we got today with coronavirus and the number of people that are dying from it, this really hasn't left us. You could just substitute coronavirus in there. About 2% of the people that get coronavirus have passed on. So you're walking around an art museum and you see several things. These all mean death. They mean that time is limited. Bubbles, so bubbles don't last forever. Skulls, meaning whoever that person was is not with us. Music has a certain timing, has a start, a beginning, and an end, right? So music is portrayed that way. A lot of times there'll be wilted flowers or other ways that, just things that don't last. And then they're trying to articulate that at some point in our lives we're going to die. So we try to keep that as far out of our consciousness as possible, but we are moving in that direction. Okay, so that was art. How about literature? Is there a question? No? Okay. So if you haven't read Khalil Gibran, you should read him. He was Arabic. He was really a wonderful thinker.
But what he talks about is what is death? What's the secret of death? And he says, well, what is it to die but to stand naked and in the wind and melt into the sun? What is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides? So think about your breathing right now. That's the restless tide, and death is the calming of that. And it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered. Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountaintop, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then you shall truly dance. I love that. It's beautiful. It's the nicest way to put death. Anyway, any poetry fans here? So Wordsworth wrote this when he was older, but William Cullen Bryant wrote, at 18 years old, wrote a poem about death. But what he talks about here, it's a long poem, so I'm only going to hit part of it, but life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art to Darth returnest, does not spoken of the soul. So that the soul is not your physical being. And then the art and long and time is fleeting. That's said about medicine a lot, actually, that there's a lot to learn in medicine. There isn't much time to do it. And our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. So every time your heart beats, it's one less heartbeat you're going to have on earth. You don't know how many that's going to be, but it's going to happen. So the other way that he talks about this is that, that death gives us a chance to do something sublime, do something that's out of the ordinary. So lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sand of time. So you think about certain people will never really be forgotten. And they could be musicians, they could be artists, they could be writers, whatever, but Nobel Prize winners, whatever. And those people are going to leave their footprints on the sand of time. But footprints that perhaps another sailing on life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. So the thinking that, not only are you on this journey, but you're around to help other people get through this journey. And that's the way I see you guys. You take care of each other, you come out, you socialize, you talk about good things, you talk about things that aren't so good, and you help other people on the journey. And that's what I really like about rehabilitation. That's what I really like about what Joseph and Jackie and Carol do. They help other people through this, difficult journey. Anyway, so I couldn't leave out the Bible. But this is a very famous quote, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" Saying there must be something after death. Unfortunately, from the science point of view, we haven't been able to make that contact, and nobody's been able to get back and give us a report just yet. Okay, so does anybody read The Economist? Economist? Okay, so they actually did a poll, and they asked people, okay, death is bad, but is there anything worse than death? Is there anything worse than death? Suffering, okay. Okay, so this red is worse than death, okay? Orange is similar to death. And then, of course, who knows, right? Because they haven't actually died. And then a little better, somewhat better, and much better, okay? So if you take something like being in a wheelchair, that's much better than being dead, okay? But what about the other side here? Bowel and bladder incontinence. 24 hours a day, relying on breathing machine to breathe, cannot get out of bed, confused all the time, all worse than death, right? So if you're in that category, you might be thinking, this really isn't worth continuing. So I got to stop saying shocking things. Something hit the ground back there. Okay, so this is the third thing. So the first thing was go home and talk to somebody. The second one is that documentary, if you can get it on Amazon Prime. The third thing is, if you don't have an advanced directive, you need an advanced directive.
Could you repeat the name of the documentary?
Oh, yeah, it's called Flight from Death, The Quest for Immortality. Flight from Death. And I can print that or send it to you or whatever you want. I can print that slide. But Flight from Death, Quest for Immortality. So that's what we're all after, is immortality. Okay, well maybe we're not actually, because I don't know if I could live 500 years, but it'd be nice to try, I guess. Anyway, so the next thing after talking to people and going to watch that Flight from Death is your advanced directive. If you don't have one of these, you need one right now. So why do you need one right now? You need to have designated somebody, just like Jackie says, that if you're incapacitated can say, this is what they would want. I can't tell you how many families excuse me, go through very difficult times because they have no idea what the person would want. So if you think that it's a topic they don't want to hear about, you're probably right, but at the time they're in the ICU, they all say, gee, we never talked about this. So please do that. So you need somebody that's your surrogate, so you can't talk anymore. You're alive, but you can't talk anymore, and you can't tell what you want. So the living will part of it is telling other people what you want. And I passed out the POLST form, P-O-L-S-T, okay? So this is the next thing that's your homework. If you don't have this filled out, how many people have a POLST? That's pretty good, pretty good. Okay, so why have a POLST? First of all, this should go in the next time you talk to your primary care doctor and fill it out, okay? Now, I don't care what you check off, but check off something because that'll give me the idea in the ICU what you want. But talk it over with your doctor and have them put it in their chart. So what this does is, you obviously fill it out with your doctor, you put your name on it, you sign it, but it differentiates full treatment from some treatment, if you can get me better, to basically I don't want any treatment, okay? And so that spectrum is very helpful for us in the ICU. So if you come in, I don't know you, I just met you in the emergency room with a tube in your mouth, I can't really talk to you, you're sedated or you're not, compos mentis. This helps me. Now, the POLST form will go everywhere. It goes to hospitals, so if you go to 3 different hospitals, the POLST form can be used at all 3 of those. It goes to nursing homes. If you go home and go back to the nursing home, it's institution independent. As opposed to if you come over to my hospital, you tell me I don't want to be resuscitated, and you now leave and come back, the only order that's actually written on you when you come back is to resuscitate you. Okay? So I have to write an order to do not resuscitate you. So POLST form will tell me that, and if you're incapacitated, it's on a piece of paper. It really helps. So please consider, read it, see if it's consistent with your values, your goals, your beliefs. It's very helpful for us in the ICU because now I can do what you want, and that's the whole point of being a doctor, is figuring out what you guys want and trying to make it so if we can, okay? It also talks about feeding. If you want to be fed, say you were on a ventilator or you were fed through a G-tube and you were bedridden, would you want to be fed or not? And some people would say no, some people would say yes. Okay, so that's kind of end of life care. Okay,
There's a
so,
question.
yes ma'am.
So only the doctor has to sign, you don't have to get this notarized?
It doesn't have to be notarized by an attorney. That's actually what's helpful because it's easier to do. The easier it is to do, the easier it is to have it available when it's needed. The best thing to do is to back that up with your advanced directive, your living will. All of them say the same thing, and your doctor has a note that says this is what you want. So the more documentation is, the better. It's a way to express it. It's legally binding in California. It tells me what to do, what you would want when you came in the ICU. If I could have talked to you a day before, you would have told me, now you can't talk to me. So that's the kind of limbo you want to avoid. You don't want to be in that. You want to be in control of what you can do. Okay, so the second to last homework thing is to read that second thing I gave to you, which is hospice versus palliative care. Now, people get this confused all the time, and I'm going to try to sort of deassemble it, but it is actually super important. So the quickest and easiest way to think about hospice care is it really is end-of-life care. You're supposed to be dying within the next 6 months, and you've decided to not go to the hospital, not get aggressive care, to stay home or be in a nursing home and get comfort-focused care. So I like the idea of comfort-focused care. I think my greatest fear is that I'm in terrible pain or terrible nausea or terrible anxiety right before I die and nobody does anything about it. I think that's my greatest anxiety. I'm not so concerned about dying, although it's certainly an issue. but it's that process of dying that I want to have some control over. And hospice focuses on your comfort. So that's pain, that's nausea, that's anxiety, distress, and they also work through your family members and understanding death and dying, and they help you after the death with the remaining people to deal with the loss. And that's actually very important too. So once you leave the hospital, unfortunately you're on your own. We don't have a lot of after death type care, but hospice does that. It actually follows up afterwards. So you have to choose that. You have to decide you're going to do that. You have to decide you're not coming back to the hospital. You can change your mind, and that happens from time to time. But usually, it's really a wonderful experience. And the hospice groups are some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. So how's that different than palliative care? Okay, so the difference is that palliative care does not mean you're terminal. You could be terminal, but let's just say I have chronic pancreatitis. I have pain all the time in my belly. And what I want is that pain to go away, okay? So I want that pain palliated. So I could go see a palliative care doctor and work on the pain. I still got my cardiologist, I still got my lung doctor, I still got my dermatologist. I'm still getting care by all those people, but I'm focusing on symptoms. So that's why palliative care is very important. So with ILD, frequently it's cough, actually. It's a very difficult thing to control. Dyspnea, anxiety, those kind of things. So they work on that part of it. They also talk through end-of-life care. They may suggest hospice, but they're ongoing. There's no reason to give up any of your other health care at that point. They're just going to focus on the part that you care about, which is getting rid of symptoms. Okay? And you don't have to be terminal. In hospice, you have to be terminal. Okay? Is that more or less? And then it's written down on that sheet much better than I'll ever articulate. But please read it and try to think about it, because I think both are super important options as you're getting towards the end of your life. There's no requirement to do these. You don't have to do them. But I think that your transition will be much facilitated by having these people involved with your care. I think I want to skip this. Okay, so as some of you may know, not all of you, there is actually a Death with Dignity Act in California. Now, I'm going to tell you that nobody endorses this. Not the docs, not the nurses. It's sort of like, you know, why would I want you not to come and be my patient? But on the other hand, Jerry Brown actually was the one who signed this. And I don't know, most of you remember his first term, right? So he was Moonbeam, you know, he was really a space cadet. But when he came back the second time, he actually was much more with it. He was much older, he really thought about it, and you know, Edmund G. was his dad. He was trained as a Jesuit priest and had Jesuit training, which is Roman Catholic training, and of course, assisted suicide or ending your own life is not what the Catholic Church advises. But in spite of that training, he said, if I'm at the end of my life, I want to be able to make the decision whether I continue to go on or not. Okay? So I'm going to tell you about this. It's legal. It's not easy. And there's a lot of reasons why you probably shouldn't do it, especially because if you're thinking about this, you're probably depressed. And if you're depressed, there's plenty of things we can actually do about that. But I want you to know about it anyway, because it's not an easy thing to talk about. And I'm not sure me as a physician could do this. There are other physicians that do it. But that being said, to have this option gives you control. And control is what you want of that particular part of your life. So anyway, it doesn't matter which organization, they all say don't do this, okay? So I want you to know that nobody thinks this is a great idea except the patients, and you guys are the patients. So anyway, you know, Oregon has actually had a law for several years now, and this is 2018 data. There was 103 physicians who wrote 249 prescriptions. The mean age was 74. Most had cancer. Most were in hospice. So most of these people died at home. Most of them had health insurance. And the answer to why they decided to pursue this prescription was loss of autonomy, decreased ability to do the things that they enjoyed, and loss of dignity. They didn't feel like their life had dignity at that point. So this is when they first started, It was actually not very well utilized in the first 8 or 10 years, but in the last 10 years or so, there's actually been a lot more prescriptions. There's more prescriptions than anybody ever uses, so I think that's important to remember too. Sometimes just knowing that that prescription exists allows them to continue on. It gives them some of the fortitude to continue on. So only about 65% of people use the prescription. So what about California? Well, California didn't enact this act until 2016, so we're 20 years behind Oregon, in some way anyway. So terminally ill patients, they can request a prescription, and I'll tell you how that gets all done. It's legal in 5 states now, Washington, Vermont, and Colorado, including us and Oregon. And then there's 7 countries, and a lot of people that don't live in these states go to these countries if they want to have this done. Okay, so how does it work? You have to be 18, you have to be a California resident, you have to be terminal, which means you're going to 6 months or less, but it's the same criteria as hospice, and most of these people are in hospice. You have to request it 3 times verbally, and then you have to request it once written, okay? So the prescribing doctor would be the initial request. You actually say, you know, I don't want to make this decision alone, this is a big decision. You send them to another physician. They decide whether they think that's an appropriate step. They're not being unduly enforced by somebody. They're not depressed, etc. And then you go back to the prescribing doctor, and it has to be 15 days after you started, and then you have to write it down that you want this done. Okay, so you guys are all probably thinking about Kevorkian. Remember, he was actually actively extinguishing people. The patient has to take this medication. So can't be delivered by a healthcare provider. So Kevorkian was actually hooking people up to an IV, giving them potassium and high doses of narcotics and extinguishing them. So again, I think that's kind of against the Hippocratic Oath. But on the other hand, if the patient chooses this, I think it's something that I can at least respect. I don't know if I necessarily endorse it, but let me tell you, this is not easy, okay? So let's just say today you decided, you asked all those people, you waited the 15 days, you wrote it out. So it's $3,000 to $4,000 for the medications, okay? Because, for instance, secobarbital is a depressant. It's 90 pills of 100 milligrams, so it's 9 grams of barbital. So just thinking, if you had to take 90 pills right now, and they're really a bitter taste. So what happens is you actually write them a prescription for anti-nausea medications before they take this. So there's the pill option, which is $4,000 or $5,000. You can actually get a pharmacy to put these together in a liquid. That's less expensive, but still is very likely to cause nausea and throw up the medications. So it's not easy to do. So it's not an easy thing, but it also gives you some control over destiny, I think. So, like I say, I'm not going to endorse it, but I think that you should know it is legal in California. It has to be done by the patient. It has to be done in that specific way. And then it's not necessarily cheap or paid for by your healthcare plan. Even though we've talked about sort of death committees and everything else, they don't want you doing this. And I don't know what it would do to all sorts of things like life insurance and everything else. There's a whole bunch of things you'd have to think through. But if it gives you some control of your destiny, from the patient point of view, I think it's good. From the provider point of view, I think it's something that we wouldn't recommend. We would rather try to work with you on palliating symptoms, working with hospice or palliative care, and obviously trying to improve your disease to where you feel that life is worth living. But I fully understand that sometimes life becomes very difficult, and the more chronic illness you have, the more likely you're stressed by this. So anyway, so those are the kind of things I wanted to cover. I wanted to put this up here. So these are all Latin quotes that you've probably heard at some point. So memento mori just means remember you're going to die. And I like this. This is a young lady looking in the mirror and see what she sees here. She sees death. So you don't see death when you're young, very often. But as you get older, you start to think about it. And this one I particularly like. So this is a fresco. So the lady that was doing the hand-painted ceramics, this is from Pompeii. Okay, so you remember what happened to Pompeii, right? It was buried by Mount Vesuvius. So this is it's sort of a lever or I'm sorry to say the right word. I'll get it in a minute. But it's essentially balancing what's going on here. So here's the balance. This is actually
Scale.
Scale. But there's another word for it. Like like the scales of justice. I guess it's scale.
Yeah.
And anyway, so this is somebody with a very rich dress, obviously very well off, and this is somebody with sort of rags here. But it doesn't really make any difference to this person. And no matter which way this tips, you're still going to die, and that's your soul right there. That's your butterfly just sort of flying away from your body. So obviously somebody did this in Pompeii before they were buried by all sorts of ashes and dust. So you never know what's going to happen to you. But even back in Pompeii, which was buried in 79 AD, they realized that no matter whether you're rich or poor, it was going to come to you sooner or later, and that the scale of death doesn't differentiate. So carpe diem, you've probably heard before, seize the day, and tempus fugit, which is time flies. But death actually gives you meaning to your life. What is it I want to do? What is it I want to get accomplished? And I need to do it because I'm not going to live 150 years. I'm going to live a certain amount, and that's it. Oldest human's about 116, something like that. So most people don't get to 100 either, let alone 116. Although there was a really interesting article in the LA Times where this lady hit 100, and she called LA Times and said, well, don't you want to interview me? I hit 100. And they said, nah, call back in 10 years, right? So they figured they got rid of her. So 10 years go by, same lady calls up and said, don't you want to interview me now? And they said, yeah, we do. So they went and interviewed her. So anyway, it's kind of a good thing. But anyway, so I'm going to stop there, but those are kind of the ways that art and literature, I didn't do music, but I wanted you to see that little video. I highly recommend that. I highly recommend filling out a pulse form and talking about it with your doctor. Highly recommend you guys talking to your family. Tell them what you want. They may not want to talk about it, but let them hear it anyway. And the last thing is do your advanced directive. If you haven't done it, it's super important because you want whatever you want to put it down on a piece of paper so people can figure it out. And I'd be happy to take any questions, and thank you for listening to what's not a great topic, but hopefully it enlightened it a little bit for you guys.
Oh, yeah.
So any question?
Once again, what was the title of that documentary?
Okay, it's Flight from Death. Flight, like, right? The quest for immortality. So
Okay.
if what I could do, I guess, is maybe just print that slide, and maybe the next time you meet, I can leave it here, and you guys can give it out or something.
We'll put it on the website.
Oh, there you go. Even better. Better idea. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a question on the form, what do you call it, the form? You said it follows you around, or?
Well, you have to have it in your pocket. It doesn't actually follow you around. So if I wrote a do not resuscitate or resuscitate order in my hospital, and you go to the next hospital over, there's no force of law there. So it only works in my hospital. This works everywhere. So if you got into the Torrance Memorial and they treated you poorly, and then you went to a little company and they treated you great, but you have this in your pocket, I'm just kidding about that. Both of those would be able to honor this form. And this form doesn't require going to a lawyer to make out. So it's actually very helpful.
They don't electronically share it, Doc?
Yeah, you actually, if you go on that, if you just type in POLST, P-O-L-S-T in California, it'll take you to the website. It's a PDF you can download. We can put it on the website if you want, whatever. It's really worth doing, and I really like this description of the difference between palliative care and hospice because most patients don't discern a difference, and there really is. Focusing on symptoms versus really end-of-life care. Yes, ma'am.
I recommend that you keep a copy of it on your refrigerator, somewhere obvious, so that if you're picked up at home and have to be transported, they can take that with you.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So that's
Someplace
something
that's
that they
easily
will
accessible.
know. The paramedics, they'll kind of go to the refrigerator and help you do
What did she say?
that. History
We can't
and
hear her.
Oh, sorry. What she said was that you should keep it on your refrigerator.
I'm not sure, that may be a little too difficult because I like to get to the fridge, but someplace easily accessible. The fridge is great because everybody knows where it is. But someplace, let's say the paramedics show up, you're not feeling good, you're short of breath, can't really say what you want that to go with you to the hospital because it speaks for you, which is the important thing at that point. Yes, ma'am?
I was told to keep the pink copy at home and then make copies for other, to take to other places.
You can do that. You don't have, I mean, to tell you the truth, I think the most important thing is to give it to somebody in your family so they know where it is. So a lot of times people arrive at the hospital. I'm going to give you okay, so my advice for you guys is the first 72 hours in the hospital, go full bore. Anything they want to do, say yes, okay? Because I can't tell you who's going to live and who's going to die, okay? That's not my job. I try my best to make sure you end up in one group and not the other, but I don't know. So I would say the first 72 hours, full court press. And then at 72 hours, if things aren't going well, you probably need to back off. Because by the time we've done 3 days worth of intensive stuff in the ICU and you're not turning around, it's less likely. It's not zero, but it's less likely it's going to happen. And that's when I start talking to the family about what I call comfort-focused care or less aggressive care. Because you're suffering, you've got a tube in, you're getting lots of different medications, you've got poked everything in your body. So you're suffering, but if you're going to get better from it, the suffering is worth it. If you're not going to get better, the suffering ain't worth it. So right around the 72-hour mark, in my opinion, is the best time to try to make that decision. Now, sometimes you're getting a little better and we're not sure, then we just keep going. That's what we call a time-limited trial. So a time-limited trial is very important. When you first get to the emergency room or the hospital, you're usually there for a reason. You want to get better. So give us time to do what we do and see if it's getting better. If it's not getting better by 72 hours, it's probably time to switch to plan B or plan C. Now, of course, you guys should do whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm just telling you my 10 cents because I see a lot of people that struggle sometimes for weeks in the ICU, and it's no place you want to be for even a few days, let alone weeks or years. So it's a tough place. And I assume several of you have visited us, and not my particular hospital, but the ICU. That's a really hard thing. So, yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure I understood. There is no centralized place where you can post this post?
Post the polls, I like that. There is no central place, and in fact, every electronic medical record stows it in a different place. So let's say you were at one hospital and then you came to my hospital. I call up for the records, I say, is there a pulse form that's available? They dig around in the file, maybe it's scanned in, maybe it's in there's actually, Little Company of Mary has an area where they keep the pulse form in their electronic medical record. So that hospital will have it, and I would give it to them, but if you go to another hospital, or if they just don't look in the right place in the EMR, they're not going to find it. So that's why I think what Carol said is important. It's better if it accompanies you. Let's just say you decided you didn't want anything done. If you come to our emergency room, you're going to get everything. You're going to get intubated, you're going to get shocked, you're going to get lines everywhere, you're going to get all kinds of medications, because if you came to us, we figure you want this, right? And so if you don't want that, so you're a part of your life where you don't really want to be aggressively resuscitated, I need to know that essentially the minute you roll in, otherwise, you switch into full care. So unfortunately, there isn't a great place that everybody will be able to get to. And the same thing, if let's say you're in the hospital, you're going to go to a skilled nursing facility for rehabilitation, before you go home, the pulse can follow you, whereas otherwise you would have to tell the SNF the same thing you told the hospital, etc. And so it gives you continuity there across the institutions. So yeah, it's a complicated world, I'm sorry. So. Okay, other questions?
Is that the same for the advanced directive?
Well, the advanced directive is there's usually a copy at home someplace, and it usually takes the family about a day to dig it up someplace. It's stowed, someplace. And then if they can tell me who the lawyer is, I can actually call their office and get a copy of it. But usually we're in that 72 hours where I'm just going full court press, and then they drag this in and it says, by the way, she never wanted this. Then we go to comfort care. But until I see it on a piece of paper, what happens, and this is the honest truth, and hopefully your families aren't like this, but somebody gets in the ICU,
somebody that hasn't seen them for 20 years shows up and says, oh, they want everything. They haven't lived with them in the last 20 years. They don't know what their life is like, but they want everything. So now you've got the family attacking each other, and nobody can make a decision because nobody has it down on a piece of paper. So please, 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 I don't like those discussions. They're very upsetting for us as well as the family. And what we say in the unit is that the critical illness brings out the worst in family dynamics. So people show up that haven't been around, maybe there's an inheritance, maybe there's a house that needs to be sold, suddenly somebody's back on and wants something done. So it's almost like the TV crime shows, you know, when somebody wants something, you sort of ask yourself, well, is there a motivation behind this that's not in the best interest of the patient? So if you write down what you want, I'm sure I'm doing what's right for you as the patient. So please, 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 please think about that. And hopefully your families are not chaotic, but it seems like the critical care unit brings out chaotic families for some reason. So anyway, that's my 10 cents. Yes, ma'am?
So are palliative care the same as comfort care?
Well, okay, it's not. Okay, so she wanted to know what's the difference between palliative care and comfort care. Okay, so when I think about comfort care or comfort-focused care, that means that basically we decided to not do anything aggressive. We're just going to treat your symptoms. We're going to make you comfortable so you pass. When I think about palliative care, we may still be in that, going to make you comfortable, let you pass, but it could also be that you just have, like say you have chronic migraines, and you just always have trouble with them, and you want that to be gone, and the neurologist is not helping you, and whatever. You can go to the palliative care with your symptom and still go see all those other doctors and be treated. But by the time you think about comfort-focused care, you're talking about a hospice. You're talking about not going to the hospital, not going to the ICU, not getting aggressive, ventilator and lines and cardioversion and everything else. You're talking about make me comfortable, which all of us, I think, at that transition will want to be comfortable. And I think that's what becomes most important. And a lot of people see hospice as giving up. I don't see it that way. I see it as, it's very unlikely you're going to get better. There are people that go off hospice. Maybe you have some friends that have done it. They look really bad. I can't predict the future. If I could, I'd go to Las Vegas and forget medicine. But if, a lot of times we make the suggestion that we think it's within 6 months, and doctors can be wrong. But that's part of the reason that I recommend the 72 hours full court press, no matter what the doctors say, because I've seen people come back to clinic and shake my hand that I was sure they were never going to leave the ICU. And when they show up to clinic, they're kind of rock stars, that they got out of our unit, and everybody's just so happy to see them. So it actually sort of renews our faith in medicine. But there's a lot of people that don't do well, that spend a lot of time in the unit and then pass on and have a lot of suffering, and that's the part that makes it hard for me. I don't want to create suffering. I want to create people that are better. If I can't make them better, I want to relieve the suffering. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, when you say comfortable, are you saying pain-free?
Okay, so the only way to be pain-free, as far as I know, is not to be alive.
What I'm talking about is that some people don't want to do too much morphine because the person who's going to die very soon might become an addict.
Yeah, so we have a concept of essentially there's two goals there. One is to relieve pain, and the other one is not to suppress respiration, right? Because you've all seen, the opioid overdose, people stop breathing. So if you're giving morphine because you want to decrease pain, and it slows up respiration, that's considered to be within the Hippocratic Oath. You're relieving pain and suffering. The Hippocratic Oath doesn't say you have to make anybody better. It says you have to relieve pain and suffering, okay? So I'm relieving pain and suffering because you're suffering, I'm giving you morphine. Now, if that results in your breathing stopping, I'm still trying to fix that part of it. It's not active suicide or not active physician-assisted suicide. But the two conflict a lot, and it's actually very hard for patients' families to see somebody gasping for air or not able to breathe, and so morphine actually makes them much quieter and makes that passing easier. So in some ways at that part of your life, morphine is your friend and breathing is not your friend. And so most of your life it's the other way around, right? You want to be up, you want to be getting better, you want to be breathing. At that part of your life, I would focus more on getting rid of the symptoms and using morphine to get rid of the symptoms.
Now, hospice doctors are really good at this, hospice nurses. Anybody had a hospice interaction with the family? They really are good. And they work you through the death and dying process, your family through the death and dying process, and they follow up afterwards to make sure you guys are doing okay with the death and dying process. I just can't tell you how important that is. And they're wonderful people. They're not evil or nasty, like we hear about in the news all the time. They're the opposite of that. They're the way the world ought to be. And so they're focusing on that. So I agree that there's two different objectives and they may conflict. But at that point in your life, I would pick getting rid of the suffering and being comfortable. And then if that results in me slowing down breathing or passing on, that's okay. At least from my point of view.
I don't just do morphine, I meant, any.
Well, actually they use anxiolytics too, but to relieve anxiety. But most of it is morphine related. And then treating nausea and treating constipation, which is the side effect of morphine. So you associate the effect with the side effect, and you don't want it, you don't take it, then you don't get the benefit. So they treat you aggressively for nausea, aggressively for constipation. Okay, is that it? All right, well, thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stringer. We're so lucky to have him as our medical director.
Right.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this luncheon. If you have any individual personal questions, and we've got literature up here on the Interpretive Center Whale Watch trip. It's right here, directions, sign-up sheets, everything that you need to do and should do. So drive home safely, and we'll see you at the Interpretive Center, because I know all of you are going. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, that was excellent. Perfect.